I might be on an oil rig on like a high up platform away from this particular system, but I'm at a console that's giving me an error. So I've asked the system about it. It's understood that the agent has tracked down the camera that it needs to get a manual reading of and provided that to the user.
Here we are again, James, episode 5, the human agent connection. Tell me a bit about this one.
Yeah, so early on we interviewed Fergus Kidd. He works at Avanade. He's been a RealWear supporter for quite some time and building some really great, compelling next generation hands-free voice interfaces for some of their customers. Really, really compelling stuff.
Yeah, some next level stuff. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's go.
Okay.
Hi everybody, delighted to have Fergus Kidd from Avanade UK on today's podcast. Fergus, let's jump straight in and can you give us a bit of background about yourself and some of the work you do at Avanade?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Fergus. I work in our global office of the CTO at Avanade, so primarily focused on kind of cool R&D stuff. So the last couple of years has been a lot about AI. For obvious reasons, but also have interests in like quantum computing, some metaverse stuff, VR, XR, lots of different cool relevant technologies. Also things like IoT, super interested in. I'm really interested in like the fusion of technologies, how we can kind of bring those together. But for those of you who don't know, Avanade is a professional services company. We're a technology company. We were formed in the year 2000, and one of our parent companies is Microsoft. So we're really heavily kind of expert in and embedded in the Microsoft ecosystem. So a lot of my role is kind of looking at the new products and services from Microsoft. So, for example, Ignite is on right now. So we're looking at kind of what Microsoft is doing and announcing there, and then bringing that to our clients and helping them like make the most out of technology. What I like to say is we kind of solve business problems with technology. So rather than looking at the kind of holes that technologies can fix, we prefer to look at an actual human problem within an organization and fix that with technology. And that's why we've been super interested in RealWear, because I think that really kind of solves some genuine sort of human level problems with the way people are interacting with technology.
So is hands-free a really big thing for you now, or is that something that you've been looking at historically?
It's something we've been looking at historically. I mean, if you kind of go back a couple of years, we were really looking at the HoloLens devices, spatial computing, but it's kind of, for niche use cases, great. We've done amazing work with the HoloLenses, really interesting projects. Where they're useful, they work really well, but they're kind of quite heavy devices to be using every day.
Sure.
The battery performance isn't amazing, so we haven't seen like a high level of uptake, which has been a shame because they started to kind of open people's eyes to this might be the future of how people are working and interacting with technology. And actually, I feel that RealWear kind of fills that almost gap in that it's not trying to do too much, which you could argue that some of the VR and XR headsets are almost trying to do a little bit too much. Whereas RealWear kind of actually fulfills the problem while still being flexible with what we can put on the headset and how we can help people. And then small things like it's light enough to wear all day. You can swap in and out the batteries, right? So that some of the practical problems that we found with HoloLens devices are kind of overcome.
I mean, obviously we appreciate all the RealWear plugs here. And we, so that is very good. I mean, there is that old phrase though of less is more. And of course, we certainly agree with that. In terms of Avanade, going back to them, and how big is Avanade? You say that your parent company is Microsoft, or one of your parent companies is Microsoft, but in terms of like global reach, what does that look like?
Yeah, so we're about 50,000 people globally, so quite an enormous organization that a lot of people have not heard of before. We work kind of directly with our clients, and our other parent company is Accenture, so we work on a lot of Accenture's clients as well. So I tend to find when I'm talking to people at kind of like events, they've heard of Microsoft, they might have heard of Accenture, but very few of them have heard of Avanade, and that's because we're kind of deeply embedded in our clients. So if you happen to work at a client or you've been on a project with us, then you know who we are. But actually, we operate in almost every country in some way. Have big American business, big presence in Europe. We're also in Australia and other markets around the world.
Nice. That's awesome. And in terms of your role there, Fergus, just going a bit deeper on that, it sounds like a super fun role. I've seen some of the videos you've put out on LinkedIn where you're like talking to yourself and you've built virtual agents and almost replicated yourself digitally. Like, can you just tell us a bit more about, I guess, that R&D practice and what you're looking at and why you're looking at it, and obviously why I guess, I mean, we're very interested in voice user interfaces, right, and LLMs and the progression of that. We spoke to Alex Karim from Microsoft a couple of weeks ago on the pod, and we went deep on some of those topics. So I'd love to know a bit more about, I guess, that R&D function that you live in, how the office of the CTO works and functions, and then also, voice as an interface. How prominent is that becoming in this this agentic world?
Yeah, good questions. So for our R&D function, the way that I like to think about it is that we're trying to answer questions that we haven't been asked by our clients yet. I think we are valued in the sort of organizational ecosystem of the world as being deeply embedded in Microsoft, being experts in technology. So therefore, it can be a bit embarrassing if somebody potentially asks you a question and we don't have the answer around the technology, right? Especially if it's an area that Microsoft's working in. A good example is quantum computing. It's not something that we kind of deliver at scale. We do a couple of small projects with clients there. It's not something we're kind of delivering every day. So we kind of have to keep ahead of the curve, like what's going on with Microsoft, what's going on in that space, so that we can answer the questions that do come in. And a lot of it is about guiding our clients through the sort of innovation world and process while supporting them with sort of the back end technologies they need to get there. So it's slightly sort of future facing. In terms of the kind of things that I'm doing every day is really playing around with toys. So it is a great job to have. I'm not going to try and pretend that I'm having an awful day at work every day. Is to really kind of play around with the toys, see what actually works and what doesn't. Right. So a big part of my role is to kind of take the hype out of technology and check what's actually kind of going on under the hood, and then start to think about where can we apply this in businesses, and then actually going into the businesses and kind of explaining what the future might look like. I think that's especially kind of prevalent at the moment with agents. People throw the term around with AI and like co-pilots, agents, AI. What does it all actually mean, and what does the future look like? In terms of like voice interfacing, it's a really interesting one. Actually, I've been in a similar-ish role within Avanade in various kind of formats for about the last 5 years. One of the first things I actually worked on 5 years ago was voice cloning, voice fonts, like text-to-speech generation, which at the time was pretty novel, right? It was pretty unusual to have a very robotic voice sounding like me. Now, as you said, George, it's like kind of run-of-the-mill, very easy to do. There's loads of different service providers. And I think what's changed there is just the kind of accuracy and reliability. And I think sort of consumer users are just getting used to, if you think back to pre-iPhone days, it's like it was either you called someone or you texted them. Now it's all like voice noting, transcription. And for me, it's like the way that people interact is different. Like people can interact in the way that they're comfortable with, whether that's, if they don't like to listen to long voice notes, they can just read the transcriptions. If they don't like to type long messages. They can just use speech to text or whatever it is. Just that kind of flexibility of approach. But what that's kind of turned into is that actually that flexibility of approach now applies to some of the hardware that we're using. So RealWear is a great example, but also, all the sort of VR and XR devices, you'll see people like doing crazy funny gestures, and actually voice is the most natural way to do that, right? Yeah. And I think, I'm not being paid by RealWear, but I think the RealWear experience is really interesting because it is just sort of natural and native, and you get used to it very, very quickly because we're used to talking to people. And I think we are getting used to talking to technology.
I think that's been a massive change, though, in the last few years. And George, you're right. This is exactly what we were talking to Alex about. Before large language models, the interface with RealWear devices was speech commands, say what you see. So on the camera, you would have take photo, start recording, zoom in, zoom out. Very simple commands, easy to understand, but limited in vocabulary. Large language models have completely changed the game. Yes, they're great for text agents, using Copilot to help you write a document. Fantastic. But actually, when you're building speech interfaces, it's totally natural. A few weeks ago, RealWear was at the ATEX trade show with Microsoft, showing off an oil and gas demo that we did, and where you can naturally speak to the device and report a fault. And it takes away that whole form-filling exercise that everybody was doing before manually. Voice commands don't make sense when filling in a form. Natural language all of a sudden changes the game. And I think, George, you said to me that it's a use case that is genuinely easier hands-free because of natural language. And I think we'll start seeing more of those. Obviously, you mentioned RealWear a lot. Very pleased to hear again, and you're not being paid for this. So you're doing a great job for the amount of money that we're paying you for this. So thank you. How did you come across RealWear, though?
I actually can't remember the first time I came across RealWear. I know that our partners at Accenture had a device in their innovation suite.
Yes.
So I know that people in the organization had been looking into it. But again, I think we hadn't had that sort of revolution of voice interface. We hadn't had, because I think it's more than just like the voice interface. You're right. It's like what we're actually doing with that, right? So maybe 2 or 3 years ago when I first saw the headset, it was very much like we needed to build kind of process apps, whereas now it can kind of be more conversational. So I think I've sort of seen them and been aware of them, but actually it came through the 5G lab with Microsoft, I believe. Okay. So that is a group of companies that includes Avanade and Microsoft who are interested in 5G connectivity, whether that's kind of over network or private. And we've been doing a lot of work with kind of communications companies. And I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe that RealWear is part of that 5G lab.
Yes. Well, we do a lot with 5G. We're part of a number of different labs. We've got strategic partnerships with Ericsson, some of like the radio manufacturers. So there's a lot going on with 5G at the minute. And I think it did come through the US team over there. And Fergus, I picked up on one of the comments you made earlier about, you play with toys. I mean, honestly, do you think RealWear's a toy, or does it have some serious business application?
No, I think that just comes from other people within the organization's view of what I do all day. No, I don't think anything that I play with is a toy. I think they all, like everything that we are looking at and dissecting, pulling apart and putting back together has to have a very serious business implication and use. Otherwise we wouldn't be looking at it. So, there are devices on the market that we may look at in terms of like personal use and, looking at how that they are really toys that sort of might change the trend of consumer products. But when we kind of get serious and actually start taking things apart and putting them back together, not that I'm going to rip the headsets apart, just, in terms of like the apps that we can run and the use cases, they all have, impact. We have to see that there's an impact in kind of business use casing before we start that process.
Cool. And I mean, I know you've had a device for a while. Is there anything you can show us in terms of, I guess, some of your thought processes? I've heard rumors you've been working on some kind of demos and maybe some agentic stuff. Maybe you could go deeper on that topic around agents and multifaceted agents. I mean, we traditionally have always done Microsoft Teams remote expert style calling. You know, I need some help from an expert like James, and I would ring him and he would help me and cut the red wire, cut the blue wire type of use case. But, you know, the way I perceive this world is that we can move to an asynchronous, always available remote expert solution where we have these agents available to us and teams of agents. And I'm no expert in this world, hence why we've got you on this podcast to try and bring some of this stuff to life for us. But if you could go deeper on that topic for us, I think that'd be really interesting for lots of people to hear.
Yeah, sure. And it's an interesting one, right? Because it's Ignite right now, and a lot of what we've seen around the announcements is around agents. And what does that really mean? It's kind of easy to imagine when you're sitting at your kind of desk on Teams that you would send a file or send a message to an agent that's able to do something with that information. So maybe it's an invoice and that agent can process that invoice for you, something you would have had to do kind of manually before. I think that kind of makes sense. The area that I'm super interested in and we've been doing a lot of work around is, well, what happens when you actually bring a human into the fold in the same way that we would today in like a team? You know, you've got teams of people working together. They each have different skills. What happens when you look at multiple agents in that way? So if I share my screen, you can see we've got a very like basic platform. Now, this is something you can easily adapt to a RealWear headset, right? It's like flexible and scalable. Again, we can use kind of voice. So I can say something like this. I've noticed there's a problem on Oil Rig 3's drilling unit. It keeps shutting down due to an overheat warning, but I can't see the digital temperature reading. So just using kind of human language conversation. In this example, what's going to happen is that the system has access to a number of agents, and we'll see some of those, but it understands using those large language models, using the AI technology, it's actually able to kind of understand the thought process of who it needs to ask what question. So in this case, we've got a live image of underneath my boiler, but this could be like any kind of mechanical or system, and we get an analog gauge reading. So I might be on an oil rig on like a high up platform away from this particular system, but I'm at a console that's giving me an error. So I've asked the system about it. It's understood that the agent has tracked down the camera that it needs to get a manual reading of and provided that to the user. Now, what it's actually then able to do is understand that we've got an image of an analog gauge. It understands that it has a capability to read that analog gauge. So it's takes a while because this is like a manual machine learning process, but it will come back, there we go, with like an actual temperature reading. So if we look at this, yes, it's somewhere kind of just above 25 heading towards 30. You can see that manually, but it's able to read that. And then you can see that actually it's then kind of originating its own conversations between the other agents to explain that problem. But again, we could be reading this out using text to speech, but it comes back saying, okay, you've got a reading of approximately 27. That's actually normal. There must be an overheat issue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've got a ticketing agent in there as well, which can interact with the back-end system, and it will actually automatically generate the ticket that you need. Now, the demo that people may have seen that you showed, that I've seen a video of you do, James, is actually you add a bit of extra information around that, so I could kind of chat through it. One of the things that I think is super interesting, though, is that we can actually go straight to the kind of source of the problem. So this is exactly the same system. You can just about see the gauge there reading a similar level. Yeah. But with the thermal, what I've done now in this scenario is I've walked down to that particular drilling control unit and taken a thermal image. So I can then upload that again with the chat, like natural interface. I can ask questions about that image. And then this example is using the O1 reasoning model that's able to understand images as well. And it can kind of talk us through actually what's happening in that image. In this case, it's a piece of my boiler. So the reason that the temperature gauge is colder is because that's the cold inlet, and then the heating system's on. So this is the magnetic filter. So there's a lot of residual heat kind of left in that. Wow. It doesn't actually have any knowledge of that system, but I'm trying to say, oh, why is the gauge only showing 30 when I'm getting a thermal reading of 45.6? Now, in a real world scenario, that could be because something's gone wrong, a pump's failed and the system isn't flowing properly. But because we have access to those this expert agent, which could be a retrieval augmented generation agent, so it could actually have access to all of the documentation that we need, we can kind of provide answers to the user on the fly. So in some cases, you may actually be able to kind of troubleshoot and solve the problem without having to raise a ticket at all by accessing that documentation. And the really cool thing about this is that we can add any number of agents together, right? We're not limited. We have an orchestrator as part of the process, which understands when to ask which agent what question and what capability each agent has. And there's a really interesting thing that can happen is that we can give these agents access to specific pre-written pieces of code to run. So we could give it access to a piece of custom written computer vision, which could actually understand why the heat is working in a certain way in this thermal image taken from the RealWear device, right? Or we could make brand new agents that are able to interact with an API that could actually shut off the pumps and actually take action. And for me, that's the kind of really cool bit, is we're getting to a point with AI where we can take action, not just generate more content to read out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. That's a really powerful demo. I look forward to seeing that on the headset. As I understand it, you're itching to get access to our demo code so you can start working with that. I promise that we'll try and get that on GitHub this week. So it'd be really good to see the kind of blending of those two systems together.
And I think because you used GPT-4, the real-time speech stuff, right? So I think that's like a perfect example of the conversational kind of ability, because a lot of the work we're doing today is very like text back and forth focused.
Yes.
But I think over the next sort of, over 2025, I think it will come back to that speech interface where actually we're not even bothering with the transcribing speech to text to send it to an LLM model to get an answer back in text to read it out again. It's going to become much more naturally conversational.
Oh, yeah.
How do you see the evolution? I mean, I'm very obsessed in UX and actually the user interface on RealWear. You have an amount of screen real estate. How do you envisage that working, Fergus? Would you see that as a platform play, or would you see that as like a custom integration every time per customer? How would you, obviously none of this is in play right now, but how would you see that mapping out, and what would be your ideal user interface on a RealWear device? Because obviously you're showing as a desktop here. What's your opinion on UX and UI experiences when maybe the screen becomes less prominent and voice takes over?
So I think the honest answer is the reason I'm showing you this on a screen is because we didn't build it properly with APIs. And so it's quite embedded in the user interface that we chose because it's a research project and we're moving quickly. So the work that we're doing today is actually to make this API based, so it doesn't matter how the messages are sent as long as they get there in the end, right? And then the user interface then becomes much more flexible, because I don't think, especially on the RealWear, like I have a preference for the stuff that James was showing where like it's responding to you with speech, because as you said, you do have a limited screen real estate. I would rather the screen real estate was used for the webcam feed, for example. So imagine if I was on sort of level 5 of the oil rig and I was looking at camera systems down at the drill platform, I would want that to be the priority focus. The messages coming in is more conversational. Now, if I needed to say, go back 10 messages and find out something else, like, yes, it would be great to have interfaces to kind of scroll through that. But again, I can do that via speech. I could say, what did you say about this again? And we can kind of regenerate that content or resurface that content. So I think actually having the kind of flexibility to be less text-based is really, really cool. In terms of how I see it being kind of delivered, we're really interested in the Power Apps functionality that you've already got, right?
Yeah.
Because if I've got an API and I can access the camera through the Power Apps, it's very easy to build exactly the same demo you've seen, but in a Power App, and have that kind of flexibility from the platform then I can integrate it into my existing ticketing system that runs on Microsoft. I can integrate it into my existing, contact book. So I can say, hey, ring George, and it has all your details and is able to do that stuff. So I'm very interested in that aspect. I think there are kind of certain situations where that might not go far enough, and we'll have to look at building and deploying Android apps. That's kind of when it will become more custom and bespoke based on the use case, right? So if we had a client that said, oh, actually, I'm using a satellite uplink and I've got to do a special login process, that might be where we start doing some custom development, and it becomes very kind of end user focused. But I think we can attack so many more business problems if we start simple and kind of build up on that.
Yeah, that's really incredible. We're a firm believer in bridging systems together. You're absolutely right. LLMs just to generate text to talk to you, like a ChatGPT-esque style system. Although this is opinion zone here, make a very good demo.
Yeah.
It's really when they start interfacing with external systems that's really powerful. And that's something we're certainly looking at. The idea that you could schedule a meeting with an LLM, or you can raise a service ticket or report a fault and so forth. I'm really excited about what you've got here. So.
I think this demo today just proves where the world's heading. And I think, we're seeing more and more and more investment into wearable computing. And I think AI is driving so much of that investment that, this seems like a really good partnership, and I'm super excited to continue working, Fergus. And thank you so much for coming on today and sharing this with us. I think, people will find this incredibly valuable. I've certainly found it very insightful. Thanks for joining us, and tune in next time for some more hands-free chat. Wow. That was cool.
That's very good.
Some next level insight. So I think that demo is actually going to be run at Microsoft Ignite as well.
This week. Yep.
Yeah. Who's doing it, James?
I think that's Aaron Reich at Avanade. Going to do a bit of a cut down version of that demo for the audience at Ignite on Thursday, which is probably going to be before this podcast goes out. Still, that's pretty exciting stuff.
And there's one thing that I said I'm not going to do, and you put your hand up last time to do this. So,
well, before I do, just for everybody out there, we will be publishing all the source code for our AI demo, our RealWear Collaborate app. That's coming hopefully this week, maybe even before this goes out. Not too sure yet, but that'd be really good. So, in a future episode, we'll walk through maybe some of that code and how it works, how you can build your own AI demos on top of RealWear. Which should be really exciting.
That's all going to be on GitHub, right?
All on GitHub. We'll post the link whenever that's live. So
beautiful. Okay,
that's great.
I'll
do my job. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in to episode 5 of GoHandsFree. As I mentioned on episode 4, we're now on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on YouTube. So please like, subscribe, follow, listen, and any suggestions that you have will be very, very gratefully received. So. Thanks very much, George. Another great episode.
Cheers, James.
All right.
See you
soon.
Bye-bye.